individual music practice rooms, you'll see citizens practicing their instruments together in small groups.
옆으로 가서 똑같이 한 번 더 하시면 돼요. 태 한 마디 끝나면 다시 해볼게요. 황황 임남인 황황 태북태.
Now, performances are given by citizens who took music lessons here and practiced their skills. This is an example that shows how 동부창고 supports creative pursuits.
겉모습은 아직도 좀 오래된 모습인데 안에 들어오니까 시설도 잘 돼 있고 청주에 이런 데도 있었구나 몰랐었거든요 사실은. 근데 알게 돼서 참 좋다. 저희 같은 사람들은 악기 특성상 구하기가 쉽지 않거든요. 소리가 높아가지고. 근데 이런 공간이 있으니까 편하게 할 수 있어서 좋습니다.
As 동부창고 bustles with artistic activities led by local citizens, it is also enriching their lives. Pursuing a meaningful life in the same amount of time allotted to everyone, while collaborating and reaching towards wider horizons, the citizens of Cheongju create art all around 동부창고.
동부창고가 지금 보셨지만 되게 예쁜 공간이 되게 많아가지고요. 저희가 이제 한 달에 한 번씩 발표를 하는데 그 발표회나 아니면 이렇게 조그만 공연, 버스킹 이럴 때 동부창고 많이 이용하죠.
3년 전에 들어왔어요. 그전에는 여기 차 살고 있었지만은 이용을 못 했었는데 제가 이제 기타를 배우면서 여기를 또 이용하게 됐는데 너무 좋아요. 지금 서 있는 이 무대에서도 3년 전에 저희가 사용을 해서 공연도 하고 그랬어요. 이런 공간이 조금 더 생겨도 너무 좋아할 것 같아요. 저희한테는 너무 좋은 자리, 장소에 위치도 그렇고 공간도 그렇고.
동부창고, an arts playground for citizens. Once an old factory warehouse, it now drives the local economy as a bustling hub for arts and culture. The past site has given 동부창고 a legacy that courses through it today. And the artistic aspirations built upon it represent new values for today and tomorrow.
공간이 사라지면 역사가 사라지고 사랑도 사라집니다. 우리 문화재유창이 있으니까 시민들이 문화재유창 때문에 자랑할 수 있는 이야기가 생겼고 문화재유창에서 무언가 할 수 있는 꿈이 생겼고 또 문화재유창을 통해서 자긍심을 갖고 새로운 도전과 모험을 할 수 있는 등등의 그런 측면에서 볼 때 되게 이 문화와 예술을 하기에는 최적화된 공간이고 여기서 더 발전한다면 산업, 콘텐츠랑 이어져서 청주를 정말 새로운 100년을 이끄는 새로운 어떤 이 미래를 여는데 상당히 중요한 더 이상 담배는 생산하지 않지만 이곳에서 문화를 생산하고 예술을 창조하는 청주의 정말로 자긍심으로 거듭난 거죠.
Despite being abandoned for years and losing its vibrancy, the old tobacco factory made a comeback under a renovation that preserved its past. The dreams of citizens are able to blossom into art in a space that once supplied jobs, but now fosters a new culture. We are curious to see how the future of Cheongju's arts and culture scene unfolds as its culture factory and 동부창고 bring a fresh momentum.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
한반도에서 가장 먼저 아침이 시작되는 곳. 대한민국 최동단에 위치한 섬. 천연기념물 제336호로 지정된 자연유산. 이곳은 경상북도 울릉군 울릉읍 독도입니다. 그런데 일본이 대한민국 고유 영토인 독도를 일본 영토라며 일방적으로 주장하고 있어요. 그 때문에 독도와 관련된 잘못된 정보들이 퍼지고 있답니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 방크에서 활동하는 성혜승 연구원입니다. 방크는 1999년에 설립된 후 지속적으로 독도 바로 알리기 활동을 하고 있는데요. 지금부터 제가 독도에 대한 올바른 정보를 알려드리겠습니다. 독도는 역사적, 지리적, 국제법적으로 명백하게 대한민국 영토라고 할 수 있어요. 대한민국에 현존하는 가장 오래된 역사책인 삼국사기에 보면 독도는 신라 지증왕 13년, 그러니까 512년 전부터 한국 역사에 등장합니다. 대략 1500년 전부터 독도는 우리의 영토였던 거죠. 독도가 한국 땅이라는 역사적 증거는 이렇게 차고 넘쳐요. 지리적으로 살펴보면 일본 영토에서는 독도가 보이지 않지만 독도와 87km 떨어진 울릉도에서는 독도가 육안으로도 보일 정도로 가깝죠. 그리고 또 한 가지 중요한 사실. 독도에는 대한민국 독도경비대가 상주하고 있어요. 왜냐고요? 독도는 명백하게 대한민국이 지배하는 곳이니까요. 독도가 대한민국 고유의 영토라는 사실, 이제 확실히 아시겠죠? 한국 바로 알리기, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences, like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with its locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Amid continued military conflict with Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump has said Washington has knocked out many Iranian naval and air targets. He also said the U.S. Navy will escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz if necessary, after Iran warned they would attack any vessel trying to pass through the key oil choke point. The South Korean government has evacuated Korean nationals and ethnic Koreans from Iran and Israel to neighboring countries. 24 people in Iran traveled by bus to Turkmenistan, while in Israel, 113 were evacuated to Egypt. President Lee Jae-myung, who's on a state visit to the Philippines, met his counterpart Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and agreed to strengthen cooperation on nuclear power, critical minerals, and the defense industry. We begin this morning in the Middle East, where the U.S. and Israel continue their battle with Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's eradicated Iranian forces, while Iran says it'll continue to fight. Our Park Eun-woo starts us off.
U.S. attacks on Iran continue as President Donald Trump says Iran's been knocked out.
They have no Navy, it's been knocked out. They have no Air Force, it's been knocked out. They have no air detection, that's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out.
Speaking during a meeting with Germany's chancellor at the White House on Tuesday, he also said Tehran's missile stockpiles are rapidly declining and that Iran would have attacked first if the U.S. and Israel hadn't acted. Trump also spoke about rising oil prices caused by the crisis, saying they would fall to levels even lower than before once operations are over. On Truth Social, Trump said Washington is willing to provide political risk insurance and guarantees at a reasonable price, adding that the U.S. Navy would escort tankers if necessary to allow the free flow of global energy supplies. This comes as Iran warned it would attack any vessels attempting to cross the Strait of Hormuz, where around 20% of the world's oil shipments pass. Trump also raised concerns that Iran's next leader could be even worse than the previous one, saying that would be the worst-case scenario. According to Iran's Fars news agency, the Assembly of Experts, the constitutional body responsible for selecting Iran's supreme leader, has been meeting virtually, adding that the body is in its final stages of selecting a new supreme leader. According to the New York Times, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, has emerged as the leading candidate to be the successor. Meanwhile, Iranian officials also spoke about their determination to keep fighting.
Now it is time to fight and defend our country, and anything that attempts to distract us or lead us astray will be rejected.
The U.S. consulate in Dubai was set on fire late Tuesday night after being struck by a suspected Iranian drone. Iranian media reported that the headquarters of the Assembly of Experts collapsed on Tuesday following U.S. and Israeli attacks. The Israel Defense Forces also said its Air Force destroyed a secretive Iranian nuclear site near Tehran on Tuesday. With tensions escalating in the Middle East, attention is now on how long the conflict may last. Park Eun-woo, Arirang News.
And South Korea has evacuated about 140 nationals and ethnic Koreans from Iran and Israel to neighboring countries as tensions escalate in the Middle East. Seoul says it's preparing additional measures for stranded travelers, including the possible deployment of military transport aircraft. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korea's foreign ministry says about 140 South Koreans and ethnic Koreans have safely evacuated from Iran and Israel to neighboring countries. According to the ministry on Tuesday, 24 people in Iran, including South Korean nationals, departed Tehran early Tuesday aboard buses arranged by the Korean embassy. After traveling east and staying overnight at a stopover, they crossed the border Wednesday evening and safely entered Turkmenistan. The evacuees include Korean residents, several embassy staff and their family members, as well as some Iranian nationals who are relatives of Korean citizens. Among those who left Iran were Iranian women's national volleyball team coach Lee Do-hee and footballer Lee Gi-jae, who plays for an Iranian club. Meanwhile, 66 others in Israel were evacuated to Egypt. They departed Tel Aviv and Jerusalem on embassy-arranged buses, with additional short-term visitors joining them at the border, bringing the total to 113 evacuees. They have safely cleared the Israel-Egypt border crossing and will travel to Cairo, with support from embassy officials and a rapid response team dispatched from Seoul. The Foreign Ministry says it will continue exploring additional evacuation options if needed, and stressed it remains committed to ensuring the safety of South Korean nationals in the region. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok has also instructed officials to prepare measures for short-term travelers in the Middle East who are stranded due to airport closures, suggesting that military transport aircraft could be deployed if necessary.
I ask that you thoroughly prepare guidance for short-term visitors returning home, provide consular assistance, and ensure transportation plans are in place in case of emergencies.
The Defense Ministry says it's preparing to immediately deploy military transport aircraft if the government requests support. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Over in the Philippines, Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Ferdinand Marcos Jr. have agreed to expand cooperation on nuclear power, critical minerals, and the defense industry. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jang-min reports from Manila.
The summit in Manila began with an official welcome for the South Korean first couple, with the Korean folk song Arirang sung by a local choir. Tuesday's talks between Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Ferdinand Marcos Jr. coincided with the anniversary of when the two countries established diplomatic relations 77 years ago. The leaders noted the sacrifice of troops sent from the Philippines during the Korean War.
대한민국의 자유와 평화를 위해서 목숨을 바쳐 함께 싸워준 우리 필리핀 참전 용사들에게 존경과 감사의 마음을 전합니다.
That bond, cemented in solidarity during very difficult times, continues to guide our strategic partnership.
Building upon the friendship, a pledge was made for cooperation in the defense industry, as well as promising sectors such as nuclear energy, critical minerals, shipbuilding, and AI.
필리핀 바탄 원전 재개 타당성 조사 결과 및 신규 원전 사업 도입 협력 MOU를 기초로 양국은 최적의 원전 협력 파트너로 자리매김하게 될 것입니다.
I expressed appreciation for the Republic of Korea's invaluable assistance and contributions to the modernization of our armed forces and strengthening of our Coast Guard, the investments that help revive our shipbuilding industry.
MOUs were signed for cooperation on a range of areas, including digital technology, science, Korean language, and cultural exchanges. The leaders also addressed peace on the Korean peninsula and the conflict in the Middle East.
영내 정세와 함께 최근 중동의 상황에 대해서 논의하였고 중동의 안정과 평화가 조속히 회복되기를 소망하였습니다.
We both recognize the growing uncertainty in geopolitical developments, which is why we agreed on the need to firmly and consistently uphold a rules-based order governed by international law.
The South Korean first couple was later hosted by their Philippine counterparts for a state dinner. Top office officials say President Lee's trip is also aimed at reaching out to the broader ASEAN region at a time of increased global uncertainties. Yoon Jang-min, Arirang News, Manila.
And now for a closer look at what President Yi's trip to Southeast Asia signifies. We're joined today by Dr. Jeffrey Kalamak, Assistant Professor of Global Business Administration at Kyongsung University. So, Dr. Kalamak, President Yi held a summit with the President of the Philippines yesterday evening. What did you make of the meeting, and what does this latest trip signal about his approach to Southeast Asian countries?
First of all, thank you for having me. I would say that the meeting was productive, and the summit with the Philippines was focused on turning diplomatic goodwill into concrete cooperation in the areas of trade, digital and infrastructure ties, and deeper security and maritime collaboration. We see here that rather than symbolic gestures, the visit emphasized deliverables such as memoranda of understanding, frameworks for joint projects, and commitments to expand defense and technology cooperation. And this summit also reaffirmed Korea-Philippines FTA framework as a foundation for deeper economic engagement. And for the latest trip of President Lee, this signals his pursuit to ASEAN as pragmatic, results-oriented approach. It is practical, transactional diplomacy, and emphasize economic security linkage by using economic tools and investment to build influence, while at the same time also strengthening security partnerships where strategic interests align.
Right, and South Korea is one of the Philippines' major economic partners, and the Philippines is important to South Korea. You know, in terms of military and economic security, how important is the Philippine market to South Korean businesses, especially defense firms?
For the defense market significance, there is a growing commercial opportunity and defense security demand, because the Philippines is an increasingly important market for Korean exports and defense suppliers. We have to understand that Manila's modernization and maritime security priorities create demand for naval vessels, surveillance systems, and defense electronics. And these are areas where Korean firms have competitive offerings. And for Korean businesses, the Philippines offers both procurement opportunities and I would like to say a chance to build regional supply chains and through local partnerships and offsets.
Right, and before heading to the Philippines, President Lee was in Singapore, and they agreed to strengthen cooperation in artificial intelligence and nuclear energy. And there was also an agreement to upgrade the bilateral free trade agreement between the two countries. How meaningful is this, and how crucial is the Singaporean market to South Korea?
A lot of things to discuss here. Well, there are three things that I need to elaborate here. Well, strengthening AI and nuclear cooperation and upgrading the FTA rather, deepens Korea's access to regional capital, standards, and high-value partnerships. It was mentioned in the meeting about the starting to discuss about the Bataan nuclear power plant. And for the Singapore, as a market, we see and we know that it isn't a big consumer market because of its small population, but it is indispensable as a regional finance and innovation hub where Korea can channel capital, test policies, and connect with ASEAN startups. And I would like to believe that Singapore functions less as a mass market and more as a regional hub for finance, investments as well, and as I mentioned earlier, high-value services. For Korea, I think Singapore is a gateway to Southeast Asian capital. It's a place to base regional headquarters and a partner on regulatory and governance issues, especially in financial technology, data policy, and AI governance. So locating investment vehicles or joint initiatives in Singapore lets Korea tap sophisticated investors and a dense startup ecosystem across ASEAN. And let me just go back to the nuclear cooperation, AI cooperation, FTA upgrade. These moves are all strategic enablers. They create platforms. I have mentioned funds, regulatory alignment, joint projects that matter more for long-term influence and ecosystem access rather than immediate mass market sales.
Right, and on artificial intelligence, what President Lee also said is South Korea will establish a $300 million fund in Singapore by 2030. And you talked about long-term investments, and this is focusing on investing in AI startups. How significant is this, and what does this tell us about the administration's focus on AI?
Well, a dedicated fund amounting to $300 million signals that the administration sees AI as a strategic economic priority and is willing to use state-backed capital to catalyze private investment. And placing the fund in Singapore, I believe, is a smart move. It maximizes access to regional deal flow, experienced fund managers, and a favorable cross-border investment environment. Practically, the fund can help scale Korean and regional AI startups across partnerships and encourage talent exchanges. But here's a catch. Here is some kind of a limitation, or I would say barrier. The fund's real impact would depend on execution, how well it attracts private co-investors, the quality of deal sources, and governance that balances returns with strategic objectives.
I see. All right, Dr. Kalamak, thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
South Korea's currency briefly weakened past the key 1,500 won per US dollar mark overnight, its first breach of that level since the global financial crisis in 2009. The won fell to around 1,506 won for $1 shortly after the New York Stock Exchange opened Tuesday, as the US dollar strengthened amid ongoing US-Israel military operations against Iran. The currency later recovered to trade back below the 1,500 level. The last time the won reached that threshold was March 2009, when the global financial crisis pushed the Korean currency close to 1,600 won per dollar. And South Korea's financial authorities and the Bank of Korea are operating a 24-hour monitoring system to respond to the situation in the Middle East. The government on Tuesday said that it plans to utilize funds of 13.3 trillion Korean won, or around $9 billion for a financial support program to assist companies directly affected by the conflict. The Financial Services Commission stated it'll proactively deploy its existing 100 trillion Korean won market stabilization fund if necessary. Meanwhile, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong convened a meeting to assess the global financial situation. The central bank is closely monitoring domestic financial and foreign exchange markets as they reopen, pledging timely market interventions based on specific contingency plans. The latest smartphones are becoming increasingly packed full of AI-integrated hardware and software features. Our business correspondent Park Junan takes us to the MWC 2026 trade show in Barcelona to cover the names that drew visitors' attention.
The Mobile World Congress 2026 in Barcelona is showcasing the rapid evolution of smartphones, with AI-integrated devices captivating tech enthusiasts from around the world. Among the standout attractions was from Chinese company Honor, which showed off its robot phone. The most creative feature was its attached robot camera, which includes an interactive AI camera module that tracks the user's movements, engages in conversation, and responds to requests such as playing a song while dancing. Could you play me a song? After listening to my question, it played an upbeat song and moved its camera module, dancing along to the music. The next stop was South Korea's biggest tech company, Samsung Electronics' latest smartphone S26 series, which features its Galaxy AI. Smartphones are built to be smart, but with AI features, they could become much smarter. The company emphasized advanced features like personalized suggestions, enhanced reminders, and agentic AI tools. One feature that got a lot of attention was the privacy display on the S26 Ultra, which limits the viewing angle to prevent others from peeking, made possible by controlling light diffusion at the hardware level. Yet amid the excitement over these AI capabilities, questions arise about whether their premium pricing truly justifies the innovations and whether these capabilities meaningfully improve daily life. The Galaxy S26 Ultra starts at around $1,300 in the US, while China's ultra-premium lineups cost up to $2,000 to $3,000. This contrasts with American tech giant Apple, which took the opposite approach with its March announcement of the more affordable iPhone 17e, starting at $599.
So AI is the future, and we really have to adopt it because it will make our lives really, really easy. But it's very important that we are offering solutions for everyone and that we can bring value to people that are willing to spend $200 or are willing to spend more.
The takeaway from MWC 2026 is clear. AI is becoming a visible partner. And from trifold designs that expand screen space to cinema-grade lenses developed through collaborations with luxury camera brands, hardware is being designed with AI in mind. 박준환, Arirang News, Barcelona.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. The Israeli military on Tuesday said it destroyed a secret underground nuclear headquarters in Tehran. The Israel Defense Forces identified the target as Min Zadai, a facility they claim Iran used to develop nuclear weapons knowledge. This strike follows the recent killing of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and several top military commanders. Iran has been making efforts to move more of its weapons development underground since June 2025. President Donald Trump on Tuesday threatened to sever all trade ties with Spain after Madrid blocked U.S. warplanes from using its military bases for strikes on Iran. The U.S. president ordered the Treasury Department to cut off all dealings with Madrid, citing a Supreme Court ruling to justify a full trade embargo. This comes after Spain's socialist leadership forced the relocation of 15 U.S. aircraft from military bases in southern Spain. Trump further criticized Spain for failing to meet NATO's increased defense spending targets of 5% of GDP. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz joined the pressure campaign, urging Spain to comply with regional security obligations. In the U.S., the father of a teenager responsible for a high school massacre has been convicted of second-degree murder. A jury in the state of Georgia found that Colin Gray was criminally responsible for the September 2024 shooting at Appalachia High School after he gave his son an assault rifle. Prosecutors proved that Gray purchased the weapon as a Christmas gift, despite knowing his son's deteriorating mental health and obsession with past school shooters. Gray now faces up to 30 years in prison. 2 students and 2 teachers were killed in the attack. In Iran, panic-driven investors moved millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency out of Iranian exchanges immediately after U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Saturday. Blockchain researchers at Chainalysis and Elliptic tracked over $10 million in outflows between Saturday and Monday as the conflict intensified. In the single hour following the first reports of explosions, funds leaving Iranian platforms spiked 8-fold, hitting nearly $3 million. Experts say the surge is a combination of capital flight by ordinary citizens and state-aligned actors attempting to shield assets from geopolitical risk. Iran's annual crypto volume is estimated to be up to $11 billion.
We are expecting some fine early spring weather today as long as we are aware of significant temperature difference between morning and afternoon. And some of the inland areas had sub-zero morning temperatures, but most parts of Korea will have sunny skies and clean air during the day. However, dust in the air will gradually build up from the late afternoon, with dust from overseas blowing into the country. West of the central regions will see bad dust levels lingering into tomorrow morning. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 11 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju, Busan will be topping out at 13 degrees. Then tomorrow will be even milder during the day. However, rain will begin tomorrow night in the central regions and Jeollado, gradually spreading nationwide the following day. And after the rain system moves out, morning temperatures will drop below freezing in most parts over the weekend.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
A country where traditional and modern cultures coexist.
Where you can explore spectacular landscapes and nature.
Savor the delights of traveling at every turn.
Where? Korea, of course.
There are some must-visit places in Korea. Ones that appear in every tour guidebook: Hangang River, Gyeongbokgung Palace from the Joseon Dynasty, and
Yes, these are essentials, but I want to go somewhere a little different. I don't have to follow the guidebook. For example, filming locations for K-pop music videos or K-dramas and movies.
traveling is all about taking it slow. A long walk at your own pace, or even zoning out somewhere quiet. Doesn't it sound relaxing?
You travel for the experience, trying something new in a foreign place, de-stressing and making lifetime memories, taking tons of pictures along the way.
70% of the Korean territory is mountainous. Naturally, hiking is a very popular pastime in Korea. Not your kind of activity? Trust me, the view will make the effort worth it. Just catch your breath by the cold stream in the valley.
Korea is surrounded by the sea on three sides. From the beach, you can enjoy a wide open view as well as various water activities. But the riverside is great too. There's plenty to see and do.
If you're in Korea, you can't miss the night view full of dazzling lights.
Yes, even the same place can have a totally different vibe at night.
Want to make unforgettable memories?
How about traveling to all corners of Korea? Join us next time to explore more about Korean culture.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Bringing news just for you. It's Wednesday, March 4th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in. Also, Cheska's with you. Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Happy Wednesday.
Yay. Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So right in the middle of the work week, and to help shake off that midweek slump, let's talk about a major life goal shared by many millennials and Gen Z. For a lot of people, that goal is owning a home, a space to truly call their own. But with rising housing costs and changing lifestyles, that dream feels more challenging than ever. And I think many of us can relate to just how difficult it can be. So before we dive deeper into the bigger picture, let's start with something personal. So Hyun, do you have plans to buy a place of your own?
Of course I do. Like, who doesn't? I think
Do you not want a home?
everyone wants a home. I think it's everyone's dream to actually own their own home. And, you know, ever since coming back to Korea from Australia, I've lived in Seoul, either through rent or jeonse. And as much as I wanted to actually own a house, even back then, housing prices seemed far from, I think, like affordable. It was like far from realistic. And this was like, what, 16 years ago. And also, like, for those who may not be familiar with jeonse, it's a uniquely Korean rental system where the tenant pays a certain amount to the landlord and leases a house for about 1 to 2 years maximum, and then receives the full amount once the contract has terminated. Now, as I have reached my 30s, unfortunately, I feel it's really important to actually, almost essential to have some sort of ownership of a house, especially as I plan the next stages of my life, whether it be marriage or even, you know, raising my own children
and having a family.
Right. And owning a house, actually, I think it gives you a sense of stability, comfort, obviously ownership and belonging. So for those who actually plan to get married or have kids, not owning a house really discourages you to take that next step in life. But I think, you know, living a life, you know, marriage and having kids is a big part of one's life. And for someone to feel very discouraged, not because they cannot afford a house, I think things need to change.
Yeah,
it does.
Moving forward,
It does feel really out of reach.
Right.
And as someone who still lives with her parents, it does feel really difficult. It's rough. What about you, Jessica?
Although, as someone who lives alone and is surviving the housing market, I do envy people who still live with their parents, very much so.
The kangaroo tribe.
Yes. And it actually ties in very closely with how steep the housing market is, because it is so difficult to own a home when you're in your 20s and 30s. And Kiwon mentioned something about people wanting to start a family, but even those who are not planning on having a family, having a house equals stability. So for me, I too also live in rental, but I actually started looking for houses outside of Seoul because of the increasing housing prices. And actually I saw on the news that there are increasingly more people who are looking for housing outside of Seoul and trying to become digital nomads, so they can actually live in a place where they can actually afford the house and still have a pretty good lifestyle and still work in a job that they do want to. Yeah.
I think that's like the reality, and people are thinking of different ideas to mitigate the situation.
Yes.
So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen.
For many young people in Korea, the dream of owning a home feels more out of reach than ever. The number of people in their 20s and 30s who are not homeowners has now reached a record high, underscoring just how challenging it has become for younger generations to enter the housing market. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the biggest challenges people face when trying to buy a home, what the government is doing in response to the growing housing pressure, and the direction society needs to take to address Korea's deepening real estate crisis.
As we just saw in the video, the gap between the dream of home ownership and reality is becoming increasingly clear, especially for younger generations trying to enter Seoul's housing market. So why are so many young people in Seoul still unable to buy their own homes, Kiwon?
It's a very good question, and I think one simple way of putting it is a principle of supply and demand. When there is high demand and limited supply, housing costs just naturally go up, and it has continuously been on the rise of the past decades, not just in Seoul, but including this whole metropolitan area. And as much as I don't want to talk about this, just to show how many young people that is, are not able to purchase a house in Seoul, let's take a look at the screen. Now, this is according to the Korean Statistical Information Service under the Ministry of Data and Statistics. The graph shows the number of people under 40 residing in Seoul that pay either rent or jeonse. The number stood at almost 800,000 back in 2015, but in 2024 it reached almost 1 million, the highest number since statistics were collected from 2015. And another figure to point out is that 26% of people under 40 nationwide had ownership of a house, while those living in Seoul stood at only 18%. Again, highlighting the difficulty of catching up with the rising housing prices, and at the same time worsening the economic polarization.
Usually the numbers always take me off guard, but this time I'm not surprised. The three of us we all want homes. None of us are homeowners. It makes
We're
sense.
part of the 88%.
Yes.
We are.
No, 82%, sorry.
We are part of the statistic, basically.
Yeah, we're part of that don't own a home.
So these numbers really show how structural the problem has become. It's not just individual choice, but affordability itself that's creating barriers for young buyers. And beyond access to housing, the data suggests the wealth gap between generations is widening as well. So how big is the real estate gap between younger and older generations, Jessica?
Yeah, Susan, as you pointed out, the generation gap has actually widened to its largest since the record has begun. And the data shows that the 20s and 30s, people in the 20s, 30s, increased by just slightly less than 2% in owning average real estate assets. In contrast, those in the 40s saw an almost 10% increase during the same period. Now, analysts do point out that younger generations have struggled due to job market instability and declining income, making home ownership increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, older generations who have actually owned the asset have benefited increasingly from the increasing housing prices over the year. Now, in short, asset growth itself is widening the wealth divide between the generations as well.
Right. So while younger people are still struggling just to enter the market, older homeowners are seeing their assets grow much faster, which naturally widens inequality. But interesting, despite these challenges, buying a activity among people in their 30s is still going up. So are more people in their 30s still actually trying to buy homes in Seoul? And how are they doing this?
Interestingly, that seems to be the case right now. And an analysis of first-time home buyers in this whole real estate market last year shows that buyers in their 30s accounted for almost half of total purchases. And this also marks the highest level recorded since statistics began in 2010. Now, although the government tightened general lending regulations last year of real estate loans, it did not impose stricter loan restrictions on first-time buyers, newlyweds, or special mortgage programs for households with newborns. And as a result of policy easing, I think many purchasers appear to have taken advantage of these opportunities for the newlyweds, the one with young kids, or people who plan to have kids as well.
Right. So this suggests that policy incentives and special loan programs may actually be shaping who is able to enter the market right now. At the same time, there also seems to be a strong psychological factor driving purchases among younger buyers. So what is this mindset that is pushing millennials to buy despite the risks that are there?
Yeah, and I think if you know the Korean culture, this might make a lot more sense because there are words on the street that the land in Gangnam is always going to go up. That was kind of the myth in the real estate. So even in their 30s, people still want to buy a home and people still want to own a home because they still believe the housing prices will keep going up. So that fear of being left behind is pushing some to, quote, buy at all costs. Now, they're stretching finances now rather than risking even higher prices later. But the data is showing a shift. Now, over 80% of recent apartment transactions in Seoul are for units priced under 1.5 billion won, mostly in the northern and outer districts. Now, in other words, many buyers have effectively given up on premium sales in the Gangnam district and are turning to relatively more affordable areas that are outside of Seoul. Yeah.
So I guess this comes from what you mentioned earlier about how, like, for older generation, they see their assets going up, their wealth going up. So
yes.
Younger generation are seeing their parents, their assets going up.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have been taught that way, but my parents actually taught me the value in real estate, and they told me it was the most stable investment that you can make because everything else was fluctuating so much. So I think with that myth, our generation definitely believe if we want something stable, the first thing to do is own a house.
Right.
But at the same time, like owning a house, it's really expensive, right? So you need seed money to start with.
Exactly.
If you don't have that, you just feel completely discouraged to even go near real estate as an investment. Nowadays, that's why we're seeing a lot of people flock to the stock market.
Exactly.
Which is kind of easing the rising of housing prices, but I mean, it's still very high up there, so almost impossible for young people like us to actually purchase one.
Right, there's a long way to go. So rather than giving up entirely, many younger buyers are adjusting their expectations at times, moving away from prime districts like Gangnam and focusing on more affordable areas just to secure a foothold in the market. So we also wanted to hear directly from our viewers. So we ran a poll on the Arirang News YouTube channel asking, what is the biggest challenge when buying a home? So here's what the results showed. An overwhelming 78% pointed to high housing prices relative to income. Meanwhile, 14% said securing initial capital was the main hurdle, and 6% cited loan regulations. And only 2% were most concerned about the possibility of falling home prices. So all of this really tells us the issue isn't fear of the market cooling. It's simply that prices are too high compared to what people earn and can afford. And to get an insider's perspective on this, we're going to be joined by someone from overseas who has experienced a wide range of different housing types while living in Korea. That conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Alyssa from Germany, who has experienced a wide range of housing options since moving to Korea in 2022, including living in a Goshiwon, which are tiny and budget-friendly micro-housing units here in Korea. So hello, Alyssa. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
Right, so Alyssa, what is your current living situation? Do you have plans to buy a home either in Korea or back in your home country?
So I live in a one-room apartment right now under the bolster system. So it's the same system like in Germany, a deposit, monthly rent, and utilities. The only difference is the amount of the deposit. So in Germany, I paid a 2 months rent, and in Korea, I paid 7,300 euros when I came. But because the Korean won changed a lot, I think it would be more like 5,900 euros now. And if I plan to own a home, I think that's a very optimistic question, especially regarding the economy and the war right now. But in an optimistic future, I would like to move to the countryside again and have my own farm or like an animal sanctuary. But I'd need like a lot of land for that, so I think that's very optimistic.
Alyssa, how do Korea's apartment prices compare to Germany's?
I would say it's very similar. So we need to compare the different areas of Seoul to cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich. And then I think we are at the same price. However, on the countryside, I'd say Germany is cheaper. There's basically no infrastructure, but you can rent a big, but maybe a little bit rundown house in the countryside for the same price like an apartment in Hongdae or Itaewon. And I think in Germany, the bigger issue than the price of an apartment is in the city is the availability.
Alyssa, I have an interesting question. We talked about how Koreans view real estate. Which aspect do you relate to coming from Germany, and which part do you not understand when Koreans view real estate?
So in generally, I think what surprises me the most is that I still meet a lot of young women, Korean women, that still want to wait till marriage until they move out or move in with their partner. And in Germany, I feel like the process is a lot faster. People want to move in faster with their partner, and so they can afford to have an apartment or even buy quicker than Korean people because they want to wait or move to Seoul only to work. And I think that's a little bit of the difference because a lot of people live with their parents that own. And that's not so common in Germany. One thing that really shocked me as like a culture shock is it's not really 100% about real estate, but about that if people rent, they tend to move a lot. So my neighbors are changing all the time, and I've only lived here for 3 years, and in Germany it was more like the opposite. So when I moved into an apartment, people would say like, oh, I've lived here for 20 years, but here it's more like, oh, I lived here for 2 months, I will move to a different house, And what took me the most is that people tend to leave the furniture at the house. So they are not taking it when they're moving, and even if they bought something new, they tend to throw it away. So when I'm walking my dog, I often see like premium trash, which is just like new furniture. And people are like, oh, it's cheaper to just leave it than to pay the moving company. I'm like, oh wow, this is very not German at all. I've never seen that in Germany.
That's really interesting how the cultural aspect plays such a big role, because in Korea, I think people tend to move a lot because so many people are living under the rental system as well. That's quite interesting that in Germany, that's not as common. People don't move around a lot. It's pretty interesting.
But in Germany, I think we have one system where the rent stays the same if you stay in the house.
Oh, I see.
So it's cheaper in the long run, but it depends on where you live, what kind of rental system it is, because it can also like get gradually higher. But if you live there for 20 years, 100% it stays the same rent as 20 years ago.
I see. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your insight about the differences and the similarities.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke with a young person from Germany about her current living situation in Korea, how Korea's apartment boom compares to her home countries, and what she relates to or finds difficult to understand about young Koreans' housing mindset. Now, beyond individual experiences, the government has also been sending strong signals about tackling the real estate issue. So what message or policy has the government recently sent on housing?
So just a few weeks ago, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung delivered a very strong message on social media stating the Republic of Unearned Real Estate Income must be abolished. So in particular, the current administration has signaled that it will intensify pressure on multi-homeowners, announcing that capital gains tax burdens will be significantly increased for properties sold after May 9 this year. So the government has made its stance very clear. If the property is not for personal residence, sell it. Otherwise, be prepared to bear heavy, very heavy taxes.
I think that's why even around me, there are people who are trying to find a house from like the ones that the multi-homeowners have, are trying to sell before May 9.
Oh, right.
So I think there's like a rush starting as well.
Yeah.
And that's not helping the prices go down at all.
Exactly, because you also have to think about the housing prices are very steep, so there aren't many buyers who can actually afford the house. So it's not even about having more houses on the market. Are there people available like us in the 20s and 30s? If there is a house available, can we afford it? Not really at the moment.
You're making me feel even more discouraged now.
Moving on. So this clearly signals a shift toward discouraging speculation and putting pressure on multiple home owners. And this tightening approach toward property ownership isn't unique to Korea. So how are other countries handling multi-home owners, Jessica?
Yes, the government has been tightening gaps on owning multiple houses, and it is seen quite globally as well. So in Singapore, tax rates are heavily differentiated based on the number of homes owned. Simply put, the more houses you own, the more tax burden you will have. Now in the UK, buyers actually face pretty steep additional stamp duties when purchasing their second home. Meanwhile, France and the United States have strengthened property taxes to curb speculation and stabilize the market. Now, in short, many countries are actually using the tax policy as a key tool to cool off the heated housing market in some places.
So we're really seeing a broader global pattern, government stepping in more aggressively as housing affordability becomes a political and social issue. Which naturally brings us to the bigger question about long-term direction. So what direction should society take on housing here?
Well, living in a capitalist society, real estate is always going to be a source of investment, a main asset driver, therefore causing more competition and rising speculation. However, when the younger portion of the population is living in a society where they cannot afford a house in an area they want to live in until they actually retire, I mean, it only brings negative results as they feel very discouraged and burdensome to actually plan big goals in life. For example, like I mentioned already during today's episode, marriage and having kids. Now, low birth rate is a national problem here in Korea. We've mentioned it so many times on the show, and it needs to be tackled in the long run and the short run. But extremely high housing prices is one reason for delaying marriage for young people, or not even deciding to have kids, let alone not two. Just having a single child is like their ultimate goal because they already know how much it costs to raise a single child here in Korea because of education, private education, to be more specific. So we have all these social problems that arise. It's not just about the rising house prices. There are so many different factors that we need to consider. But I think this is one of the main reasons why young people are very reluctant to actually take the next stages in life because you need a big space to start off with once you get married. I mean, if you live by yourself, it's fine. You can live in a small place. But if you get married and start having kids, wow, you need a bigger place to live. And can we afford that in Seoul? It's almost very slim. So I think things need to change. Otherwise, I guess if there's more infrastructure in the country area, more people feel encouraged to move down there. But for now, that does not seem like the case. Everything's all centered in Seoul, the Seoul metropolitan area. Therefore, the house prices are rising. So I think the government is doing a great job, and I hope this moves. This is like the starting point of more people feeling encouraged to actually own a home and raise a family.
I agree. What are your thoughts on this?
I absolutely agree with Kyun, but on the actual investment side of the home, I would also like to suggest a different perspective, which I think is, it's not so much about the real estate being an investment, I think it's about the balance. Because for the longest time, when you talked about our generation, right, a lot of families have built their asset and wealth through very smart real estate investment. The problem wasn't the real estate investment, I think it was that we didn't have enough guardrails. So when there is short-term speculation and people only investing for the speculation purpose, I think that can actually be a problem. So we should have more policies to actually protect first-time buyers, newly married, married couples or people wanting to have a family, but also have infrastructure that can take people outside of Seoul so that they can actually have a space and a more luxury lifestyle that are not so concentrated in the main metropolitan area. I think that could actually ease the overheated housing market, because even if the housing do come in the market, as we discussed just now, there aren't that many people who have the money and the asset ready to buy. So I think those are some of the things that should be considered. Yeah.
So it's clear that the reality around home ownership is becoming increasingly complex. Governments may adjust policies, but the deeper question is what kind of housing culture society wants to build. Because in the end, a home should be more than investment. It should be a place to live. And also, Arirang TV is celebrating its 30th anniversary with a special global viewer event, My Arirang Story. So share your experience with Arirang TV and what it has meant to you through a photo or video. Submit your story by March 8th, 2026, and selected entries will receive BTS's 5th album, Arirang. So visit www.arirang.com for more details, and we can't wait to hear from you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Kyun.
Always a pleasure.
And also Cheska.
Pleasure, thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching, and may our dream homes arrive before prices climb any higher. We are
News Generation.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, BANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?